Speaking to a room he cast as the senior leadership of America's armed forces, Donald Trump delivered a sprawling address that ricocheted from nuclear deterrence to recruitment statistics, from police and firefighters to cartel boats, from NATO money to the renaming of the Pentagon. The common thread was a promise of overwhelming strength, military, economic, and political, and a pledge to wield it to avoid wars abroad and impose order at home. He began with the most fearsome topic in statecraft: nuclear weapons. Trump framed the nuclear balance as both a rising challenge and a domain where, he argued, US superiority remains decisive. He said he had acted swiftly after hearing a mention of the word nuclear, ordering US submarines forward as a signal of resolve and readiness. Donald Trump said, "But in 5 years, they'll be equal. They're coming up. And you don't have to be that good with nuclear. You could have 12th what you have now and still do the damage. That would be, that'd be so horrendous." As he told it, the talk of nuclear risk triggered a concrete step. Donald Trump said, "But I announced that, based on his mention of nuclear, and it was really a stupid person that mentioned the word nuclear. I moved a submarine or two. I won't say about the two over to the coast of Russia, just to be careful, because we can't let people throw around that word." He punctuated that with a flourish on language and deterrence. Donald Trump said, "I call it the N-word. There are two N-words and you can't use either of them. Can't use either of them. And frankly, if it does get to use, we have more than anybody else. We have better, we have newer, but it's something we don't ever want to even have to think about." Trump extolled the stealth and survivability of US submarines, claiming American platforms are undetectable and adversaries are not. He folded that into a broader celebration of what he called a renewal of the spirit in the armed forces, anchored by recruiting and retention gains he portrayed as historic. Donald Trump said, "Over the past 8 months, new enlistments, I'm so proud of this, have surged to record highs, the highest we've ever had. For the first time on record in 2025, the Navy, Air Force, and Space Force all met or surpassed their recruiting goals 3 months early, and the Army did it 4 months early. In Trump's telling, those targets were met under stricter standards, a reversal from what he described as a recruiting crisis a year and a half ago. He reserved special praise for the Marine Corps. Donald Trump said, "For the Marines, morale is so strong that the Marine Corps will meet its 2026 retention targets before the end of October, which never happens." The former president then turned to Space Force, asserting it was his creation and claiming US dominance in space. He also touted a sweeping pledge of future military investment. Donald Trump said, "With that goal in mind, I've committed to spending over $1 trillion on our military in 2026. And that's the most in the history of our country, $1 trillion. Alongside spending, Trump promoted specific modernization steps, tens of billions for the nuclear deterrent and a new Golden Dome missile defense concept. He spoke approvingly of a next-generation fighter jet he said would be called the F-47, and in a characteristic aside, linked the number to his own presidential count. A signature refrain of the speech was merit. Trump lauded a Supreme Court decision he said restored merit as a national principle and promised to apply it across the ranks. The military, he argued, must prioritize fitness, ability, character, and strength over political considerations. That led to a broader riff on culture, a fighting and winning machine that avoids wars through deterrence, but is prepared to prevail if necessary. Trump interwove domestic security into the military narrative, arguing that inner-city violence constitutes a modern theatre of conflict and praising firefighters and police officers as frontline actors. He painted a dire portrait of urban crime, naming Washington, D.C., Chicago, Portland and Seattle, and asserted that firm orders and the presence of uniformed forces had flipped the situation. Donald Trump said, "Washington, D.C. went from our most unsafe city to just about our safest city in a period of a month. We had it under control in 12 days. It's perfect." He also described authorizing training for a quick reaction force designed to quell civil disturbances and declared a tougher stance for service members under attack during such incidents. On the borders and transnational crime, Trump depicted a campaign against cartel maritime smuggling that, by his account, has been so successful that even fishing boats had disappeared from certain waters. He connected the effort directly to fentanyl deaths, arguing that strength had staunched the flow. As the address expanded outward, foreign policy re-entered. Trump said he had stopped a war between India and Pakistan by threatening to cut trade, later recounting praise from Pakistani leaders who, he claimed, credited him with saving millions of lives. He boasted of negotiated settlements elsewhere, including in Africa and the Caucasus, and then cast the Russia-Ukraine conflict as the toughest remaining case, one he still expected to solve. He expressed disappointment in Vladimir Putin for prosecuting a war he said should have been over in a week. Trump repeatedly returned to peace through strength, featuring NATO as proof of leverage. He said he had pushed allies from 2% of GDP defense spending to 5% and emphasized that the US now primarily sells equipment rather than funding the war effort directly. The theme of profitable rearmament also carried into his description of backlogs for aircraft like the F-35 and F-47, and for ammunition production that, he said, must accelerate. At times, the speech blended nostalgia with procurement. Trump mused about the concept of battleship, admiring heavy armor and big guns and contrasting steel with aluminum. The point was to underline presence and power, even as he insisted modern systems like stealthy bombers and air defenses showed that US technology is unmatched. Donald Trump said, "During the war, we went 14 for 14. We had 14. This is where Iran. We had 14 missiles coming at us. All 14 were knocked out of the sky, every one of them." He framed technology as an extension of culture and spirit, Sparta to Rome, to Britain, to America, arguing that the US difference rests in people, tradition, and will. That culminated in a sweeping declaration of primacy and a warning to adversaries. Donald Trump said, "We have the greatest military in the world, but we make the best equipment in the world." The speech also included a proposed bureaucratic rebrand, renaming the Pentagon as the Department of War, which he argued would paradoxically help prevent conflict through the clarity of purpose that the name confers. Donald Trump said, "In the coming months, we'll be making even more historic announcements to fully embrace the identity of the Department of War. I love the name. I think it's so great. I think it stops wars." On the Middle East, Gaza was center stage. Trump said the White House had rolled out a plan for peace, complete with a supervisory board of peace he said he had been asked to chair. He described a near-complete framework requiring just one final signature and attached a threat. Donald Trump said, "But we have just about everybody. We have one signature that we need, and that signature will pay in hell if they don't sign. I hope they sign for their own good, and we create something really great." Throughout, Trump tied national resurgence to his election and leadership. He said the United States had shifted from a dead country a year ago to the hottest country in the world, citing orders for US industry from Gulf partners and an influx of investment he attributed to tariffs and policy changes. He lingered on tariffs repeatedly, half joking about prior backlash to calling tariff his favorite word, and folded the revenue into arguments for rebuilding the fleet and industrial base. Not all of the rhetoric was foreign-facing. He returned to US cities as training grounds for the National Guard and the military, promising deployments to Chicago very soon, and asserted that federal intervention had ended protests and occupations in the Pacific Northwest during the previous administration. In his telling, clear rules of engagement and swift action ensure safety and respect for uniformed personnel and reduce the chances of conflict escalating. Nearing his close, Trump broadened out to a roll call of American martial heritage, from Washington and Jackson to Eisenhower and Patton, and to the global ledger of US campaigns. The aim was to situate his agenda in a longer story he characterized as unmatched courage and capability, guided by prudence, deter, avoid war if possible, and win decisively if not. Donald Trump said, "When it comes to defending our way of life, nothing will slow us, no enemy will stop us. We will fight, 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 and we will win, win." He ended on a familiar coda, praise for the troops and a benediction for the country after an hour plus of crowd-pleasing asides, statistics delivered at pace, and a rotating cast of domestic and foreign villains. For supporters in the room, it was a maximalist vision, a massive defense budget, revived recruitment, harsher tactics against crime and cartels, hard lines abroad, and a rhetorical campaign to reassert American dominance across every domain, sea, air, land, space, and the political arena that shapes them all. If there was a thesis, it was that strength begets peace, and that his administration, past and present, had both the will and the wallet to deliver it. And if there was a pressure point, it was the insistence that one final signature could unlock a Middle East calm, backed by a promise as sharp as any in the address. Donald Trump said, "Remember, we never want to use it, but we have the most powerful nuclear capability, and I call it nuclear deterrent of any other country. Nobody close."